Do you really think you deserve to be here? Margaret Whitmore's voice cut the elegant air of the gala as a sharp blade. All the guests turned to witness the embarrassing scene that was about to unfold. Isabella Rodriguez, just 28, firmly held the crystal tray as she felt the weight of 50 curious looks at her. Boston's most exclusive charity party had completely stopped. The conversation ceased. Champagne cups frozen in the air, and even the orchestra hesitated between one note and another. "Sorry, ma'am?" Isabella kept her voice calm, though her heart triggered. 5 years cleaning Beacon Hill's homes have taught him that moments like this could define not only their night but all their career. He never imagined that his work as an eventual waitress at exclusive events would put her at the center of such a serious accusation. Margaret, wife of the real estate tycoon Richard Whitmore, approached his $15,000 dress rocking dramatically. His jewels gleamed under the crystal chandeliers, each piece worth more than Isabella won over a whole year. "My jewelry has disappeared from my room today. A family emerald that is worth more than his whole house, I'm sure," announced Margaret, his voice loaded with calculated contempt. The murmur of the crowd grew like a wave. Isabella recognized some faces: influential politicians, CEOs of large corporations, people whose houses she had already cleaned in silence for years. Everyone now watched her like a criminal confesses. The feeling of déjà vu hit her as a punch in the stomach. It was not the first time someone in the elite had tried to blame her for something he had not done. "I didn't get anything, Mrs. Whitmore," Isabella replied, her voice echoing through the silent room. "I didn't even get into your room today. I worked only on the main halls, as you can confirm with the supervisor." "Ah, of course I would say that." Margaret laughed, a cruel sound that made some guests laugh nervously together. These people always have a ready excuse, right? Richard Whitmore, a corpulent man with an air of permanent superiority, nodded to two rapidly approaching security guards. "I'm sorry for this," he murmured to the nearby guests, as if Isabella were invisible. "But we can't tolerate this kind of problem in our charity events." Isabella closed her eyes for a second, taking a deep breath. Those faces around her did not see a working woman who sent money to her diabetic mother in Mexico. They didn't see someone who studied right at dawn after working 14 hours a day, dreaming of a better future. They saw just one more immigrant to blame when something went wrong. "Proceed with the magazine," ordered Margaret, crossing his arms with cruel satisfaction, "and make a point of checking everything very well." But while Margaret continued his outraged performance to the elite audience, Isabella noticed something no one else noticed. On the other side of the hall, near the French windows that gave to the garden, a tall man of a distinctive appearance watched everything with unusual interest. His eyes did not show the same contempt as other guests. There was something different there, something that seemed mutual recognition. Isabella had learned to read people very well in her silent work in the elite mansions, and that man was not just another curious spectator of this public humiliation. There was something in his gaze that suggested a much deeper connection with this specific situation. The man stepped ahead, as if about to intervene, but then hesitated. Her fingers drummed nervously on the side of the leg, as someone making an important decision. As the security guards approached her, Isabella maintained her dignity intact, as if she keeps a secret too powerful to be revealed ahead of time. His years of silent observation in the elite homes had taught him much more about those people than any of them could imagine, and that mysterious man across the hall seemed to know exactly that. If you are enjoying this story of injustice and turnaround, be sure to subscribe to the channel, because what was about to happen would forever change everyone's life in that golden room, especially those who thought to know the whole truth about who really was Isabella Rodriguez. The security guards approached Isabella with the kind of arrogant confidence that only comes when you are sure that the victim cannot react. Margaret Whitmore crossed his arms, savoring every second of the public humiliation he was orchestrating. "Let's go soon," Richard murmured to the nearby guests, as if Isabella were just an inconvenient obstacle on her perfect night. "These people always cause but problems when we least expect it." Isabella remained immobile while the first security began to review her invasively and unnecessarily rigorously. The murmurs of the crowd grew. Some guests seemed uncomfortable with the scene, but no one dared to intervene. After all, questioning the Whitmore would be like questioning Boston's own social structure. "They find something," Margaret whispered high enough for Isabella to hear. "It can't be that difficult." It was at this moment that Isabella realized the true cruelty of those people. It was not enough to accuse her falsely. They wanted to give her publicly, transform her into an example for all other immigrant workers that knew their place. His 5 years of impeccable work, his blameless references, none of this mattered in the face of the well-dressed prejudice of that elite. "Nothing here," announced the first security. clearly disappointed. The second confirmed with a nod after an equally thorough magazine. Margaret did not hide the irritation. Impossible. She must have hidden somewhere. Check your bag again, your clothes, everything. It was then that Isabella did something that took everyone by surprise. Smiled. It was not a smile of submission or nervousness. It was the serene smile of someone who knew exactly what was happening and why. The kind of smile that appears when you finally have the confirmation of something that has been suspected for a long time. "Can I ask a question, Mrs. Whitmore?" Isabella said, her voice clearly echoing through the silent hall. Margaret hesitated, clearly not expecting her victim to take the initiative of the conversation. "Oh, what? The emerald that disappeared was a white gold chain necklace, isn't it? With small diamonds around the central stone?" Margaret's face paled slightly. "Like you? And did you have an inscription on the back? Something like, 'To my dear wife, with eternal love'?" The silence in the hall became deafening. Richard Whitmore stepped forward, his red face of anger. "How the hell do you know this?" Isabella kept smiling, her eyes slowly walking the crowd until she landed on the mysterious man across the hall. He still watched everything with that intriguing expression, but now there was something more, a kind of growing admiration for the way she was conducting the situation. "Because," Isabella said slowly, "I saw when you hid the jewel in the main corridor flower vessel about an hour ago." Soon after, he heard his telephone conversation with someone about getting rid of unwanted help before the guests arrived. The murmur of the crowd exploded in whispered conversations. Margaret staggered slightly as if he had punched. This is ridiculous," stammered her. "You're inventing these things to get away." Isabella nodded calmly. "It's an interesting theory. How about we will check the flower vase together?" Margaret's eye panic was visible by a second fraction before she recovered the composure. "I won't submit to this absurd theater." But the damage was done. The guests now looked at Margaret with growing suspicion, some whispering with each other over the strange reluctance to check such a simple accusation. Isabella had spent years observing in silence, cleaning houses, serving in events, being practically invisible to these people. They spoke in front of her like a furniture revealing secrets, stratagems, prejudice, all because they assumed that a domestic working immigrant didn't have enough intelligence or relevance to represent any threat. How they were wrong. The mysterious man finally moved, crossing the hall with certain steps. As he approached, Isabella can better see her features. There was something familiar in him, but she couldn't identify what. "Maybe," he said with a deep and authoritarian voice that made the whole room if he turns to him, "we really should check this story of the flower vase. After all, the truth always comes to light." Margaret Whitmore looked at the newcomers as if he had seen a ghost. What this arrogant woman didn't know was that her attempt at public humiliation had just awakened something much greater than simple revenge. She had released years of careful observations, secret connections, and an intelligence she had completely underestimated. The mysterious man approached with calculated steps, and according to the light of the chandelier lit his face better. Some guests began to whisper with each other. Isabella finally acknowledged him. It was Daniel Morrison, the billionaire CEO of Morrison Holdings, one of the largest investment companies on the East Coast. "I think it would be interesting to check this vase story," said Morrison with a natural authority that made Margaret back off instinctively. After all, serious accusations deserve serious investigation. Margaret tried to keep the composure, but Isabella could see the panic growing in her eyes. "Daniel, we don't have to do this. This circus, it's obvious that she's lying to get away. So there's no problem checking out, right?" Morrison smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was the kind of smile that closed billions of dollars and destroyed entire careers. As the crowd moved toward the main corridor, Isabella walked alongside Morrison. "Why are you helping me?" she whispered. Morrison looked at her with an expression that mixed respect and something deeper. "Because 3 years ago, when my mother was admitted to the hospital fighting cancer, there was a nurse who took care of her as if it were her own family, a Mexican immigrant who worked 3 jobs to support her family." Isabella felt her heart accelerate, the puzzle piece finally fitting. My mother talked constantly about Isabella Rodriguez. As she was kind, intelligent, he studied right at dawn. As her smile illuminated to the hardest days at the hospital, Morrison stopped before the vase of ornamental flowers. "When I saw your name on tonight's employee list, I came especially to meet her. I never imagined it would come well when it comes to a frame like this." Margaret Whitmore watched the scene unfold like a slow-motion nightmare. Richard tried to intervene. "Daniel, this is ridiculous. Why would you believe the word of a—" "What, Richard?" Morrison turned, her voice cutting like ice. "Complete this sentence, please." The silence was deafening. Richard swallowed hard, realizing that he had almost made a fatal mistake in front of one of Boston's most powerful men. Isabella approached the vase, her hands shaking slightly, not of fear, but a mixture of anger and early satisfaction. For years observing these families, she had learned her standards, her tactics, her prejudices. Margaret was not the first person Rich trying to blame domestic help for his own problems. "Can I?" Isabella asked politely, pointing to the vase. Morrison nodded. "Please." Isabella carefully moved the artificial flowers and, under the shocked eyes of all present, removed a necklace of emeralds just as she had described, white gold chain, diamonds around the central stone, and certainly an inscription on the back. The murmur of the crowd exploded in outraged conversations. Some people started filming discreetly with their cell phones. Margaret staggered back as if he had punched. I don't understand. How did it get there?" "Interesting question," said Morrison, examining the jewel. "Isabella, did you mention a telephone conversation?" Isabella nodded calmly. "About an hour ago, as I tidied off the cups at the table near the kitchen phone, I heard Mrs. Whitmore talking to someone about how to get rid of unwanted help before the important guests arrived. He specifically mentioned that I knew too much about family affairs. What Margaret didn't know was that Isabella had recorded part of this conversation on her phone, a habit she developed after years being guilty of things she didn't do. His law studies had taught him the importance of documentation. This is an absurd lie," Margaret shouted, but her voice sounded desperate now. "She planned all this." Morrison examined the jewel more closely. "So you confirm that this is your emerald, the same one that claimed to have been stolen?" Margaret noticed the trap too late. Well, yes, but so, how did she know exactly what the jewel was like, including the inscription, if she had never seen her before?" Morrison asked with the surgical accuracy of a judicial interrogation. Isabella watched Margaret struggling in her own lies, like a fly attached to a spiderweb. Years of silent humiliation, to be treated as invisible, to have its intelligence underrated, all this had been preparation for this moment. What those privileged people never understood was that when you make someone invisible, that person has complete access to all their secrets. And Isabella had learned a lot in her silent years, including the cruel methods that some families used to get rid of employees who knew too much about their questionable businesses. As the guests began to move away from Margaret with disgust and disapproval, Isabella finally felt something she had not experienced for years, the sweet taste of justice being served exactly at the right temperature. But Morrison had an expression that suggested that the night was far from over. Morrison examined the jewel with the accuracy of those who were used to evaluating evidence in corporate courts. "Fascinating," he murmured, turning the necklace to show everyone the recorded inscription. "For my dear Margaret, with eternal love, Richard, 1998. Margaret Whitmore looked like a salt statue, completely paralyzed by the reality that crumbled around him. The murmurs of the guests grew in volume and indignation. Cell phones discreetly pointed out in their direction captured every second of their social fall. This is impossible," stammered Richard, sweat forming in his forehead. "Someone must have put the jewel there to incriminate my wife." Isabella smiled serenely and removed her phone from her pocket. "What an interesting coincidence, Mr. Whitmore, because I have the recording of the conversation his wife had exactly an hour and 12 minutes ago." The silence in the corridor became absolute. Morrison arched an eyebrow, clearly impressed by Isabella's meticulous preparation. "A recording? My law studies taught me to always document suspicious situations," explained Isabella, activating the audio at the maximum volume. Margaret's unmistakable voice echoed through the luxurious corridor. "I need to get rid of this Isabella before she tells someone about fake contracts. She cleans my office, see everything. If she opens her mouth on the housing project documents, the faces around them pale instantly." The housing project was a billionaire public work that was being investigated for corruption for months, involving half of the politicians present at the party. Margaret tried to approach Isabella to take the phone, but Morrison blocked her way with natural authority. "Keep reproducing, please. I will accuse her of theft in front of everyone. Who will believe the word of an immigrant against mine? After that, no one else will hire her in Boston. She will learn not to move where she should not." The audio continued to reveal sordid details about systematic bribes, counterfeit documents, and elaborate money laundering schemes involving popular housing construction, fraudulent bids, and secret accounts in tax havens. Richard Whitmore staggered back as if he had taken a direct punch in the solar plexus. "Turn it off! Turn off now!" But it was too late. Several guests had already recorded the full audio on their own phones. Among them, Isabella acknowledged Patricia Williams, an investigative journalist at the Boston Globe that was present as a special guest of the charity party. Morrison smiled, the kind of predatory smile that preceded hostile acquisitions and calculated bankruptcy. "Isabella, you mentioned specific documents. What kind of documents?" Isabella took a deep breath, savoring the moment she had prepared for months of silent observation and careful planning. I photographed all the fraudulent contracts that I found cleaning the office of Mrs. Whitmore. Overpricing at 400%, ghost companies registered in Delaware, transfers to numbered accounts in Panama. Margaret finally exploded, her elegance mask completely lazing. "You're miserable immigrant. You are just a leveraging thief that has invaded our privacy. This is illegal." "Margaret!" Morrison's voice cut the air like a whip. "I strongly suggest you stop talking right away. Anything you say can now and will be used against you in criminal and civil proceedings." Isabella continued to calmly, as an experienced prosecutor with devastating evidence. "The documents have already been delivered to the federal prosecutor this morning, along with copies for the IRS, FBI, Senate Ethics Commission, and Department of Housing and Urban Development." The collective sound of shocked aspirations echoed through the corridor. Some guests began to move discreetly away like rats abandoning a sinking ship. Richard Whitmore grabbed Margaret's arm with increasing despair. "What did you do? What the hell did you do? You destroyed our whole family. I saved evidence of crimes that would hurt hundreds of needy families." Isabella responded with unshakable dignity, her voice echoing through the silent corridor. "Crimes you committed thinking that a simple maid would never be smart enough to understand complex financial spreadsheets and legal documents." Margaret collapsed in a nearby chair, finally understanding the catastrophic magnitude of his situation. Not only had he lost his social reputation, he had destroyed an entire criminal empire with his excessive arrogance. Morrison looked around for the evident panic guests. "I assume that several of you will have very interesting conversations with your criminal lawyers in the coming hours." Isabella kept the phone in your pocket, watching the scene with silent and deep satisfaction. Years being invisible, being underestimated, being treated as human furniture, all this had been their greatest strategic weapon. "There is one last thing," she said, taking a sealed envelope out of her blazer's inner pocket. "Mr. Morrison, I believe this belongs to you." Morrison opened the envelope carefully, and his face lit with genuine emotion. It was a letter written by hand by his late mother, addressed to "Isabella, my guardian angel," thanking for all the kindness and selfless care during her last painful days in the hospital. "She said that if I once needed real help, she should look for him," Isabella explained softly. "Today I discovered that sometimes the universe conspires, that justice is done exactly at the right time and place." As police sirens began to sound in the distance, someone had called the federal authorities. Margaret Whitmore looked at Isabella with hatred that quickly turned into absolute despair and existential panic. The woman who had tried to destroy an invisible immigrant by pure prejudice had just discovered that she had completely underestimated the power of those that privileged society systematically chooses to ignore. But the true revelation was yet to come, and would change forever not only Isabella's life, but the fate of the entire corrupt elite of Boston. 6 months later, Isabella Rodriguez walked through the corridors of Morrison Holdings as the company's legal director, her shoes echoing with authority on the marble floors that she had once cleaned in absolute silence. The ironic of life is sometimes sweeter than any carefully planned revenge. The Boston's Panoramic View executive office was a completely distant universe of that humiliating night in the Whitmore Gold Hall. In the elegant walls, framed with genuine pride, were their graduation in law, completed with maximum honors, and a photo of it receiving the prestigious Citizen of the Year award at the mayor for bravely exposed the largest political corruption network in the city's history. Margaret Whitmore was not as gloriously lucky who had tried to deny Isabella. Sentenced to 8 years in federal imprisonment for systematic corruption, money laundering, and criminal cartel formation, she brutally discovered what really meant being treated as invisible in the American prison system. His former Bostonian elite friends avoided any association with his damn name, and Richard had lost not only the family business, but also publicly requested divorce to try to save the little left of his reputation completely destroyed. "Isabella," Daniel Morrison entered the executive office with a genuine smile of satisfaction, carrying a folder of important documents. "Bankruptcy Whitmore construction lawyers have just accepted our definitive final agreement. They will pay exactly $50 million in compensation for systematically harmed by the fraudulent housing projects that lasted decades." Isabella nodded with deep satisfaction, meticulously organizing the legal documents on her mahogany executive table. For intense months he had worked tirelessly, 16 hours a day, to ensure that each family deceived by the Whitmore elaborate criminal schemes received fair and complete compensation. It was not just about personal revenge, it was about real and lasting justice for people who suffered in silence for years without hope. The phone played with the personalized touch she had configured especially. It was his mother, calling directly from Mexico with overflowing emotion. Piss. I just saw you on Nuevo's international television. The whole city of Guadalajara is commenting on my daughter who became a famous lawyer and arrested the rich American bandits. Even the mayor here wants to meet you. Isabella smiled, deeply thrilled, remembering the humble and hardworking woman who washed home 16 hours a day to pay her intensive law studies. Mom, now I can afford your full diabetes treatment at the best specialized hospital in the United States. And guess the best part? I'm buying a beautiful 2-story house for you here in Boston, in the same neighborhood of Elite where I worked as an invisible maid. After turning off emotional, Isabella looked through the panoramic window and saw a different group of immigrant students who she now personally mentored through the educational foundation that had created a substantial part of the millionaire compensation money. Young people determined like her, who cleaned corporate offices at night and studied intensively at dawn, dreaming persistently with a better and fairer future for their familias. Patricia Williams, the respected Boston Globe investigative journalist, had masterfully transformed Isabella's dramatic history into an award-winning series of reports that won the coveted Pulitzer Award for investigative journalism. The impactful documentary, The Invisible Maid, was seriously competing for the Oscar for Best Documentary of the Year, and prestigious universities around the country used their extraordinary case as a compulsory study on how systematic prejudice can completely blind people to the intelligence and rail of those who systematically underestimate. An educated knock on the door interrupted his reflective thoughts on justice. It was Marcus Thompson, his personal assistant, a young Haitian immigrant brilliant that she had strained to get full bag at the prestigious Harvard Law School. Miss Rodriguez arrived a personal letter addressed specifically to you, with a seal of the federal prison. Isabella immediately recognized the trembling and visibly desperate handwriting. It was from Margaret, written directly from his cell in federal prison. Isabella, I finally understand the full catastrophic dimension of what I did criminally with you and so many other innocent people. My blind arrogance and systematic prejudice destroyed not only my own privileged life, but irreversibly damaged vulnerable families who depended on those housing projects. May you know that your unshakable dignity that terrible night haunts me every day in my cold cell. You showed more genuine class in your worst moments than I have shown in a whole lifetime of completely unmerited privileges. Isabella folded the letter carefully, keeping her in the special drawer where she kept important reminders of her journey. True forgiveness was not about completely forgetting injustices. It was about not allowing the hatred of others to poison his own naturally generous heart. That sunny Sunday afternoon, she visited the modern community center that had helped finance in the humble neighborhood where she grew up, between constant financial difficulties. Dozens of hopeful immigrants of various nationalities studied advanced English and intensive university preparation in the rooms that bearing the respectful name of their late grandmother. On the main wall of the inspiring lobby, a golden plate with elegant letters said, "Education is the most powerful weapon you can use to change the world, Nelson Mandela." While observing those hopeful and determined faces, working people whom society systematically treated as invisible and completely disposable, Isabella deeply realized that her revenge had metamorphosed into something infinitely larger and more powerful. It had not only toppled a corrupt empire, he had built solid and lasting bridges so that others could cross the historical abyss of social inequality. Morrison appeared silently beside him, observing the same genuinely inspiring scene. Do you know what most impresses me most in all this extraordinary story? You could have simply chosen to destroy the Whitmore cruelly and stopped satisfied. Instead, it has built something monumental that will positively impact whole generations of families. Isabella smiled serenely, watching a young Venezuelan immigrant determined from only 19 years old, leafing a dense book of American constitutional law. The best revenge is not to destroy your enemies cruelly and empty, Daniel. It is building a completely new world, where the injustices you have suffered can no longer happen systematically with other vulnerable people. 6 months earlier, she was an invisible maid, being publicly humiliated by pure social class prejudice. Today, it was one of the most respected and influential lawyers of the whole country, inspiring hundreds of promising young people, and living proof that intelligent determination always definitely overcomes ignorant prejudice. Margaret Whitmore tried to cowardly erase Isabella Rodriguez from society for racial arrogance and systematic discrimination. Instead, he has inadvertently created one of the most influential and genuinely admired social leaders of his generation. The real victory was not simply to see his enemies fall into a deserved misfortune. He was realizing that he had become too big, so anyone could try to make them feel small again. If you also firmly believe that education and persistence can overcome any systematic prejudice, Subscribe to the channel for more genuinely inspiring stories that prove that success, the well-conquered, is really the best revenge that exists against ignorance and institutional discrimination.